Yo, this is Zach Merrill, the owner of Action Tees, and you are listening to the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Welcome to the Oblivion Bar podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
Joining us this week on the show is the owner, operator, designer, and creative force behind the high-end, retro-inspired comic book t-shirt brand, Action Tees. It is our pleasure to welcome Zach Merrill onto the Oblivion Bar podcast.
Yo, stoked to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, let's do it.
Zach, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. We will just kind of start off hot and heavy, just get right into the questions here because we want to talk about Action Tees, get our listeners familiar with this brand, your brand. And I'd love for you to kind of just give everyone sort of an overview of what this brand is and what inspired you to create these t-shirts.
Yeah, totally. So the super short version is Action Tees is basically retro-inspired t-shirts packaged like action figures. Mm-hmm. So they're not all packaged like action figures, but that's kind of like the gist of it. And really for me, it's about an experience. It's about creating excitement. And it's about having something that hopefully captures the feelings of excitement and just being stoked that I think a lot of us had as kids in the comic culture. And it's something that is, interactive. And I just put a lot of time and a lot of work into these. And I personally think they're really cool and they just get me excited. And that's what I hope to share with the t-shirts. And an even shorter version is I screen print bright and colorful comic inspired t-shirts.
Yeah.
I love the description of this because just exactly what you said. It is an experience. It is a nostalgic experience because as a kid who opened up a lot of action figures, it's just there's like that it's a once in a moment like yeah. feeling that you get from ripping that open. But like your t-shirts, when they come like this, you almost don't want to. So there's like that you're on the fence. Like, do I want to open this and like break the seal and because we're almost trained these days not to break the seal on action figures, Sure. And also your stuff is very artistic. So it's just, I don't know. That's a great way to explain it is it's an experience and a product.
Yeah. I try to find the balance between, industry and artistry. Because on the one hand, I'm not mass producing this stuff at all. And I have no desire to. And so I'm always kind of trying to go against the idea of, when people think screen printed t-shirts, they think, oh, I can pick it up at Target. They think, oh, I can get, 300 printed for, whatever my buddy's baseball team. And that's a thing. That's a part of the world as well. But there's also the other side where, there's a lot of like fine art prints. There's a lot of just people doing it in like really traditional old school ways and where things just look really different. And so I really try to exist in the middle there, but at the same time still make it as accessible to people as I can,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is your history with comics or with, we'll just kind of encompass it as like nerd culture. As a kid, were you a big comic reader or what was kind of your grasp to that world?
Yeah. So a whole bunch of different stories.
We want all
probably,
of them.
Let's see. My earliest one, it was funny. I've been thinking about this for the past few days. Like I love really cheaply, like, badly done, like knockoff, like action figures and stuff. I was a big fan of like gas station toys as a kid. And there was this place I grew up in, small town, Northeast Connecticut. Both my parents were artists, graphic designers, big part of the culture. My mom worked at University of Connecticut as a graphic designer, and on campus there was this place, I'm pretty sure it was called Phil's, and it was basically a candy shop, stereotypical, pretty sketchy, like had probably been there since the 60s, been closed forever now, but it was like peak 80s. all the shelves were like hand built, poorly painted. And one of my favorite action figures and one of my like earlier memories of, that kind of culture was getting a bootleg Rambo action figure. And I'm pretty sure it was called like, Action Man or like, Exploding Guy.
First Blood Man.
First Blood
Yeah,
Man.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I love that thing, man. And so from there, that kind of grew into, other small town. There was a comic shop, Wonderland Comics, which I think is still there. At the time, they were kind of going out of business. And I would just go in with my mom, and the dude would just give me like piles of comics, just like piles and boxes. And so I got really hooked on the early 80s, mid 80s, 90s G.I. Joe comics. That was probably like the first like really hardcore like deep dive. And then Ninja Turtles was always an ever-present thing from like a really young kid. I just loved, the bright colors, just the over the top. It was just like peak like 90s, and my like overstimulated brain was just all about it. Like I still love it, and that's still like a big influence for what I'm doing with Action Tees now. It's just like, let's just go hard,
Yeah. For the listeners out there, you can't see it right now, but Zach has the biggest smile on his face as he's going through these core memories, and it's so inspiring. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just had to point that out for people. Just imagine Zach with a big ass smile as he's describing, this old school action figure.
Oh, dude, I love it. And there was like this other gas station toy where it was like I don't know if you remember, there was like a Gambit X-Men figure where it had like these plastic like light up cards you could like slip into his hand with a little plug and it would light up. They probably had a bunch of different variations, but there was this like gas station like robot toy with this like crystal laser sword, and I just thought it was like the freaking coolest thing, man. Like so that was kind of my introduction into that culture, and then just always being surrounded by art like at home in so many different ways. So it's always kind of been like a present force for sure.
Aaron, I'd love to kind of pick your brain on this because you're very much a kid of the 80s. But for me, Zach, I think we're maybe in a similar age here. I was very, I've always been into comic book characters, superheroes specifically. I've always loved that world. But when I was a kid, I was very much more into like, it was both Dragon Ball Z figures and wrestling figures. I was a big wrestling fan. We were around for the Attitude Era, so I had my Stone Cold Steve Austin, my Undertaker, my Rock.
Oh, yeah.
If I ever got in trouble, my mom, the first thing she would do, she wouldn't take my TV, she wouldn't take my PlayStation, she would take my action figures.
Ruthless.
So Aaron, what was like? I know, right? Aaron, what was your like go-to figures when you were a kid?
Oh man, so I mean, okay. You're going to have a true confession moment with Aaron. I'm going to try not to go too much into the weeds, but I'll say my action figures were obviously Ninja Turtles, He-Man, things like that. I had the G.I. Joes because basically if you know anything about G.I. Joes, they were connected like upper body to like their lower body with just like a rubber band. So you could like make them do the splits and then twist the legs and they do like a helicopter kick.
Yep.
But if you did it spinning action, but like if you did it too much you'd break it.
Yeah.
So you'd basically have to figure out how to reconnect those using your like stolen mom's hair bands, and so like those were my toys. But like I'll be honest, like as a kid I didn't care. Like I didn't really have a lot of action figures, and so like I played with whatever I could get my hands on, like My Little Pony, anything and everything was an action figure when I was a kid.
Sure.
Dope.
Yeah. Well, Zach, we could sit here and talk about action figures, but I want to dive more into Action Tees in your process. So
yes, Action Tees, not figures.
Yeah, exactly. So, and creating these shirts is, a very extensive process for you. It's all over your TikTok. You do an incredible job stepping people through that process. What is your background with screen printing and just like fashion in general? Because you can't go into this with just like no fashion sense like Aaron and I.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could, but it might be a little harder. That's an interesting thought. But yeah, I mean, I have been screen printing in various forms for probably over 10 years now. So I got into it really kind of like DIY. I taught myself how to do it basically from scratch in my parents' basement. And I got into it because I wanted to make t-shirts for different bands that I was in. I've been in a couple like DIY touring bands. I toured full time for a couple of years, and that was just like a huge part of my life. And, when you're on the road doing the DIY thing, like you got to make money somehow, and selling merch is like a huge part of it. And so I was like, okay, t-shirts. I just want to teach myself how to do this, how to get into it. And so, over a few months, I just kind of taught myself that whole process, basically made just about every mistake I think it possibly could, and then learned from it, And so through the years, that kind of became my source of income. I would do random jobs for, churches, for little league teams, all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up working in like a contract print shop. And that's just like a totally different thing. It's just all like mass production, how fast can you fill these jobs for, big companies and stuff like that. And that was pretty brutal. But it really showed me, what I didn't want to do with screen printing. And so I ended up putting it to the side for a while. I just got busy with other things in life. I got burnt out. I moved to a new city, Pittsburgh. And then recently, just in the past few years, I was like, okay, I want to get back into this, but I want to do it in a way that I really want to do it, in a way that I kind of always wanted to do it, but just got kind of lost in the sauce of like, how much money can I make doing this? Or, how much can I do this for other people? Yeah, and so my first foray into it was really just from like the DIY heavy music scene. Just like, I want to make shirts for my band and sell them for money, And I think just being in that kind of scene, you inevitably get involved in the fashion around it. Any underground scene, especially music, there's just a very particular like fashion to it. And so in like the hardcore punk scene, you had like a lot of black t-shirts, you say death metal t-shirts, you immediately think of like a certain style of art. And so that was really kind of my first like introduction into clothing that really represented like a culture and like a way of living. And I just loved how a t-shirt or a piece of clothing could really represent like something much bigger.
I love that we're kind of in a new era of screen printing as well. As we're going to go back to nostalgia for a moment, because as a kid, most of my favorite superheroes didn't have t-shirts. Of course, you had your Batmans and your Spider-Mans, but you didn't often see a Silver Surfer t-shirt at Walmart or what have you, right?
Yeah.
And we're living in a new age where Zach, you're living proof that you can make high quality t-shirts, of anything really. And
Sure.
Kind of along those same lines, you've said multiple times, actually, you kind of live by this creed, especially on your social media. You always make a point to say that, this is quality over quantity. Everything is limited for a reason, which I think is both an incredible marketing strategy and also builds the confidence and trust of your customers, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It goes hand in hand, and that kind of goes hand in hand with, a big thing that I like to push is, process over product as well. Like I'm not a t-shirt factory. Like I have no desire to like mass produce anything that I'm doing, and I'm doing it in a very traditional, like old school way. That's, very similar in a lot of ways to the way that comics were printed. Mm-hmm. And so that in hand goes with the limited edition of it as well. And that also creates a lot of excitement. It's not something that everyone is going to have. And it also puts the responsibility on me to really put something out there of quality. Like I have no desire to half-ass something. I have no desire to just put stuff out there just to put stuff out there, just to make, shirts because I think someone will buy a Spider-Man t-shirt. I specifically haven't done, a lot of the big like characters like Spider-Man, for example, even though people ask me all the time, like, oh, do a Spider-Man. And it's like, I don't, sure, it would be sick, but it's not something I'm not trying to like jump on that just because it's, hype. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's definitely for me a big foundation. And I think a lot of that honestly goes back to like the DIY, like hardcore and like punk culture, kind of that, rebellious attitude of I'm going to do things my way, and not what quote like sell out, whatever that means.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
Well, as Ron Swanson once said, never half-ass anything, always whole-ass, or never half-ass two things, whole-ass one
Yeah.
thing. So,
hell yeah.
that actually brings up a question that I'm curious about for you, and obviously this is kind of like a one-man process, a one-man thing that you've kind of you've taken onto yourself. How big do you want to grow Action Tees, or do you just want to maintain this? And like you said, I mean, obviously, I hearing the way you speak about it, hearing the passion that comes from you about your products, you would obviously never. I think there's a lot of similarities between you and Chris. No matter how much you have to take on, you're never going to let your quality drop.
Sure.
But you obviously want to grow. So how big do you think you can take it, and what do you want? How do you want to take it?
Yeah, lately that's kind of been a constant thing on my mind. It's to the point where, I'll release a t-shirt and in 24 hours, I'm like, dang, I might need to close this pre-order early, and I don't like to, throw out what kind of numbers I'm pushing out there and stuff like that. It's kind of up to me what I think is like a good amount, but it's less than probably what a lot of people think, but it's also probably more at the same time. And so it's kind of trying to find that balance of like, okay, how can I continue to do this in a way where it's still limited, but how can I also grow, the brand, because it is a brand, in a way that is more accessible to people, will provide, ultimately more passive sources of income, and we'll just be able to just continue to organically grow. And I think ultimately what I'm coming down to is a lot of the drops that I do with Action Tees, no matter how big, are always going to stay limited no matter what. But there are going to be other aspects of Action Tees that are not going to be limited. For example, I am experimenting with putting out my own comics, like just really simple original character stuff, and then designing limited Action Tees around the storyline of those characters. So there'll be as many comics or whatever small items available for people around that, but then there's always going to be the limited amount of Action Tees that I still feel really strongly about, that I print, with my two hands. And then there's also the potential for another line of Action Tees where, okay, someone else is going to print it. I can send this stuff to a factory, and they can do, whatever, a couple hundred pieces, and it will be available for really cheap. But it's clearly going to be at a lower level than the typical like special Action Tees,
Yeah.
And so it's just all these things flying around in my head of like, how can I continue to grow? But how can I also keep my integrity with keeping things limited and special and, two hands? Like, it's becoming really apparent I only have two of these. And so it's just a constant...
For now.
Yeah, it's a constant work in progress. And that's another thing is, I'll have people come in and help me with packing and shipping, stuff like that. Just like, okay, like I don't need to obsess about how perfectly this t-shirt is folded, things like that, and letting go of some control.
I need help in that arena, Zach, because
Chris,
dude,
I'm talking to two Chris's.
It's eventually I feel like you get to the point where it's like, okay, like what's more important, spending 20 minutes like folding t-shirts, or 20 minutes working on just whatever it is, fill in the blank, that you kind of decide is more important. It's a struggle, but it's something that a skill that I am getting better at, that I have had to get better at.
Are there any kind of, I guess you would say, I'm using this term with all the respect in the world, but like a bigger kind of fine, high-end fashion graphic tee shop? Like I'm familiar with like Rucking Fountain and Weapon Prime is another one that comes to mind. Like there are these companies that do, I guess I won't say a similar thing as you, because your brand is very like, you're not going to find another t-shirt. I'm not just saying this because you're right in front of us, Zach. You're not going to find another t-shirt like your Action Tee t-shirt. but like there are companies
Sure.
that do it kind of maybe a similar process. Is there a brand, like a kind of, again, a bigger brand that you look up to, or you kind of like maybe try to fashion yourself after a little bit?
To be totally honest, no. And I don't know if that's to my detriment or a benefit that in a lot of ways I almost kind of choose to stay ignorant about some things. Like I actively don't look at social media, at other brands, at other people, not because I'll get jealous or anything like that, but because I am so excited about what I'm doing and really believe in what I'm doing that I don't want any other things like getting in the way of that, if that makes any sense. And so when it comes to action tees, I don't really have anything like modern that I can put to that I'm like, oh, I want to be like that. I just want to be like action tees, and I just want to continue to, hit those goals that I have in my mind to get to a point where I feel like satisfied and confident in what I'm doing. And the closest thing would be, just like retro stuff, like Comic Images, who printed out of New Jersey, who did all like the vintage, like all over prints, that people pay hundreds, thousands of dollars for, like on eBay now. That would be the closest thing, and that's a long game, like I know that that's a long game, but I'm just I'm confident in what I'm doing and the future of action tees. Yeah.
I'm curious. So your first drop on action tees was kind of like a Kirby inspired Doctor Doom. Aaron will tell you, listeners of the show will tell you, Doctor Doom, giant fan. He's my favorite villain just in comics in general. That's kind of, I think, what brought me to you. Maybe my algorithm heard me talk about Doom in the background, was like, hey, check out this shirt.
Nice.
And I'm
That's
curious,
cool.
We'll go over some of the other shirts that you've done here recently, but specifically the Doctor Doom, because I firmly remember that being a very popular drop for you. What was that like? Did you have any like levy on that, or did you just put it out there and see what people's interest was and it boomed?
Yeah, definitely the last part. I mean, literally, I was kind of at a point with screen printing where, I had kind of done like, okay, I want to do something crazy with it now. And I, again, got kind of lost in the sauce of, I need to be making more money. I need to be doing this to make money. And I was like, you've already been down this path. It's a dead end road. Just like, don't go there. So I just like dropped all my jobs, all my print jobs. I decided, okay, I'm actually going to do something for myself that I just really want to do. And that was the first action tee drop of the Doctor Doom. And I had no intention of even like selling it. I had no intention of even mass producing it. It was just like, oh, I've been sitting on this artwork for months at the time. I just kept it on the back burner. And it was just a combination of, my love for packaging design. And I just wanted to print an old school comic t-shirt, like for myself. And I put it out there. I think I put it out there on TikTok at the time. And it just got pretty crazy for a minute. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And so it's been pretty cool since.
Awesome. So other designs that you've done, Mary Jane Watson, Ghost Rider. By the way, for everybody listening, not for anybody, but for everybody listening, you need to go to Zach's. We'll drop his social media platforms and tags at the end, before we head out of here. But you need to go check these out, because Mary Jane Watson, Ghost Rider, one of my personal favorites, Venom Eddie Brock, that symbiote one is just gnarly. Like, it's so awesome. I love it. Hobgoblin, and with that you did a retro pumpkin launcher, the Chrome Crusader by Czarface, the Hulk Bruce Banner, which is like, if you look at the design, like you will instantly recognize it. It's not like, I don't want to say it's like a popular image, but it's an iconic like look that you cannot mistaken for any other character, and it's so well done on a shirt that you did. And then the Power Team featuring Jean Grey and Storm, which is just, if you're an old school comic head, you'll recognize the sexiness of this shirt like so quickly. But those are the shirts, those are the drops that you've done. I mean, do you have any that are just like specifically like your favorites? Like, tell us, give us some of the dirty deeds.
Yeah, totally. So like I was saying, like pretty much every drop from the first one to the most recent one has really been about pushing my process and my technical skill. And so while I certainly consider the character, my first thought is not, oh, I want to do a Hulk or, oh, I want to do Doctor Doom. That's like, I don't even like consider that. It's kind of what inspires me. And then I'll pull and work with stuff from there. So I think my favorite one so far, I mean, it has to be the first one, the Doctor Doom shirt, just because it was my first action tee. And it's the simplest in terms of process. But at the time, it was like big. It was the first time that I had printed, a jumbo size print on my flat table press using my shirt boards. And there was just a lot of unknowns. I was just like, this is the first time I've printed this way. This is like very, old school. I didn't really fully understand it. And it was awesome because it was such a great learning experience. And it was just so cool to be able to translate something, from my head in a design and make it a reality onto a t-shirt in a way that I was really stoked about, and in a way that I think really set it apart from a lot of mainstream printed t-shirts. So it's got to be the first one, and then the Eddie Brock Venom one as well, just because that one was like 7 colors, and that was crazy for me to do. But again, it was about pushing myself and my process, and I love how that one turned out too.
That you did like a while ago, you did a Sigourney Weaver one.
That's an older one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to do some more of those like pop culture like rip ones too. I'm big fan of Sigourney Weaver, all that alien stuff, all about it.
Yeah.
Get away from her, you bitch.
She's mine.
What do you say to folks who come to you and say, "Hey, I missed the Mary Jane. Like I missed the drop. And I really want one." What do you say to those guys?
Oh man, I mean,
sorry about you.
In a nicer way possible. I'm like, dude, sorry, man.
Yeah.
Like, you can
suck, loser.
Yeah, like maybe you can catch one on eBay in a few years for a couple $100 or more. Like, like that is just such like a hardcore thing for me. Is that like this stuff is like limited? Like I don't, like I can't tell you the amount of people. Back to like the Doctor Doom one that asked me like, hey, can you make me one? Hey, can you drop this again? And like I won't do it, like because I'm not doing it for like the money. Like when I say no, it's adding value to what's out there. And the people that were able to get it, it makes it all that more special and important to them and to me. And that's like really, really important for me. So, with my limited drops, it's like, that's it, man. Like, game over, dude. Like, I'm sorry, man.
Over,
like,
man.
That's it, dude.
Aaron, don't ask the next question where I ask Zach to make me a Dr. Doom. So don't ask that one, okay?
Okay. Skipping that
go
one.
ahead and skip that question.
One.
Just skip the next 4 questions where we ask him to do all these different ones. I will say, if I could just throw it, I think we both have like a recommendation. You definitely have to take it. Obviously, like you said, it's totally about your creative process and what strikes you in the night. But for me, I would love to see you do a Silver Surfer. I think that would be super cool. Again,
that'd be cool.
My 2 favorites are definitely, if I could show you guys right in front of my computer screen, is just a mural of commissions of both Doctor Doom and Silver Surfer from different comic conventions and different artists throughout my time going to Comic-Con. And then Aaron, you had one as well, right?
No, Chris.
You don't want to say the one that you told me earlier.
Okay. So we had a conversation previous to this where we're like, what would you have him make, man? What would you have him make? Chris like, Silver Surfer. If I can't get him to make me a Doctor Doom, it'd be Silver Surfer. I said I would love to see a She-Hulk. Yeah. Like that would just be
nice.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of She-Hulk, but
yeah.
I admire the fact that you're sticking to your guns and not like just making like more just because people ask you to. I think that's a very as like a people pleaser myself, I could not do that.
Oh dude, that was really tough for me because coming from like the more business side of screen printing where it was like that's what you do. It was like, oh, print all these shirts for me with my design, and having to learn to be like, literally I won't. Like I can't. It's hard sometimes, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is what would you say is your relationship to comics now? Like present day 2024. Are you much of a comic reader nowadays, or?
So in a lot of ways in life, I am stuck in the past. So while I do very much so enjoy comics a lot still, you know, it's comics from, you know, the 50s, the 60s, you know, up into the 90s. And that's probably the extent of where I'm at specifically with comics. You know, like my most recent kind of like dive is in Saga of the Swamp Thing. Like I love it. Just the colors in that are just so good and like so different in a lot of ways from kind of what was going on at the time. So in terms of like modern comics, I'm so out of touch. Like I don't have anything like against it. I just always go back to like the more like traditional like old school stuff. And I think that kind of also goes in line with just the way that I print too. You know, it's just I'm just like stuck in the past, man. Like I'm so out of the loop with like new stuff, especially movies too. I'm just like, you know, I'm like, oh, the first Spider-Man, you know, like I'm way back, man.
Tubby's my guy.
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah.
I love the fact that you're like you said, you're very like you're a traditionalist. Like there's tattoo artists out there that only use traditional type, you know, tools to do tattoos. You know, there's piercers. You know, like I love the fact that you're like, I'm gonna stick to these old school ways of traditionally screen printing this stuff, and you know, it's I don't know. I think I that's something that I admire for sure.
Good.
Well, and also kind of speaking on Saga Swamp Thing, they recently put out these beautiful. I love Saga Swamp Thing. Aaron will tell you, it's one of my favorite runs of all time. And they put up
just going over everything he loves.
Yeah, we're just talking about what Chris loves today.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
New shows, but the new segment, what Chris loves.
They put out these beautiful, like large absolute editions of the Swamp Thing run by Alan Moore. And
sick.
But okay, and the packaging is incredible. It's a giant size of that original comic. But, and you're gonna hate this, Zach, is that they recolored all of the comics. So it's all off-white pages with like brand new coloring, and it just doesn't look right. It's like trying to go back and watch I Love Lucy in color. It's just weird.
Yeah,
like, you know, you can't do it.
It's weird. It's definitely like a balance. You know, on the one hand, I get it, and it can totally work for some things. But on the other hand, there's just something about it that just kind of loses just that like depth. You know, I think the depth is a big part of it. Like, you know, the cheap paper that they printed on and like the 4-color process, like, you know, it's totally different like viewing experience, you know. And not to hate on anything modern, because there's some really cool stuff going on. I'm just so in love with just that look, that vibe, you know.
Well, Zach, we're kind of nearing the end of this conversation, and before we let you go, is there anything you can tease for us in terms of action tease? Can you give us a hint about your next drop? Anything you can offer up to listeners? We're going to be dropping this sometime in the month of February. So if you have something planned, is there something you'd say?
Yes. So next plan is I'm trying to do some more personal stuff. Like I've been sitting and kind of brainstorming on a handful of original characters and storylines that I want to introduce into the Action 2 world that I'm pretty excited about. So this is just kind of a very quick first look at one of the characters, Heavy Hands. It's very Swamp Thing inspired, as you can tell. Think Swamp Thing kind of meets Sin City vibe.
Okay.
It's just a very quick look at the back. So that's going to be one of the next drops, is going to be an introduction to the new character. And then after that, I have no idea. Not a clue.
You're just like...
Not a clue at all.
I guess I'll ask one more question before we let you go. When you decide on a shirt design or you know, a character, for instance, is it like a long drawn out, like, should I do this? How am I going to approach this? Or do you just see an image and you go, that's it, I'm doing that tomorrow?
Yeah. Yep. I'll see something, or I'll come across something and I get obsessed with it, and I become obsessed with it, and I don't stop being obsessed with it until I'm done printing it. So yeah, that's usually how it goes. I won't force anything, no matter how many people ask me to do a Spider-Man t-shirt. If I'm not feeling inspired to do a Spider-Man t-shirt,
Sure.
I won't do it. So I don't know what the next thing that hits me is going to be, but it's going to be sick.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. Like, keep us in the know on that, on when you start, like, sending out the comic, because I definitely would be interested in checking it out, man.
I'd love to have you on too to talk about it once it's live and out there. We'd love to do anything possible to help you kind of promote this. And kind of rounding out this whole conversation, Zach, we want to thank you so much for coming on here to the Oblivion Bar podcast. Aaron and I could sit here all night talking to you about these shirts and your process, but we just honestly recommend that people, after listening to this conversation, go to shopzachmerrill.com and just look at these bad boys live and in person, because, Zach can sit here and tell you about, the 4-color process and the presses and all these things, but you don't understand the gravity of these t-shirts and this, this brand until you're looking at them face to face. So, Zach, I'm going to pass the baton off to you one last time. Is there anything that you want to highlight or any socials that you want to plug before we let you go?
Just my Instagram, TikTok. I try to share as much as my process on possible, and reels and all that stuff. That's the biggest thing, man. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Power Team was the most recent drop, correct? On February 1st?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
And what was your handles there on the socials?
Handle on Instagram is just my name, Zach Merrill, ZachMerrill with the underdash. And TikTok, I think, is just Z Merrill. Just Z Merrill, Merrill.
Yeah. All right. Well, Zach, once again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And hopefully we'll have you back on once we get heavy hands out there in the world.
Hell yeah. I appreciate you guys big time. This was a lot of fun.